The universe had belonged to the Vethkai for 400 years. Their empire stretched across 3,000 star systems. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Their victories were so many that they had stopped counting them long ago. Instead, they counted the species they had conquered. The number stood at 1,203 spacefaring civilizations. 89 of those had tried to resist. All 89 were now extinct. High Admiral Kethvora stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the stars. His ship was called the Eternal Certainty, and the name was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. The Vethkai always won. They had always won. They would always win. This was as certain as gravity, as reliable as the turning of planets around their suns. Kethvora was old by his species standards. He had served the Dominion for 300 years. In that time, he had commanded the destruction of 16 civilizations and the subjugation of 47 more. He had never lost a battle. None of his admirals had ever lost a battle. The very concept of defeat had become strange to the Vethkai, like a word from a dead language that no one remembered how to pronounce. His body was tall and thin, covered in smooth gray skin that shifted colors with his mood. His eyes were large and black, designed by evolution to see in the gentle light of his homeworld's twin moons. His hands had 4 long fingers each, delicate and precise, perfect for operating the holographic controls of Vethkai technology. The Vethkai had evolved on a world called Veth Prime. It was a paradise by any standard. The gravity was low, barely half of what most species considered normal. The temperature never varied more than 10 degrees throughout the year. The weather was calm, the predators were few, and the food was plentiful. The Vethkai had risen to intelligence not through struggle, but through cooperation. They had built their civilization on a foundation of peace and plenty. This made them believe that the universe was meant to be peaceful. It made them believe that gentle species were the natural rulers of the cosmos. When they discovered faster-than-light travel and began to explore the stars, they were shocked to find that most other worlds were not like Veth Prime. They found planets with crushing gravity and violent storms. They found worlds where the very air was poison and the water was acid. They found places where the ground shook and the mountains spat fire. They called these places death worlds. The Vethkai could not understand how any intelligent species could evolve on such planets. They assumed that any creatures that survived such conditions would be primitive and broken, too busy fighting for survival to build anything worth noticing. When they encountered species from death worlds, they usually found this assumption to be correct. The creatures were tough but simple. They could be conquered easily. They could be used as labor. They could be controlled. This pattern had repeated itself so many times that the Vethkai no longer questioned it. Death world species were inferior. Garden world species, like themselves, were superior. This was the natural order of things. Now Kethvora looked at the report in his hands and felt nothing but mild curiosity. A survey ship had discovered a new system at the edge of explored space. The system was called Sol by its inhabitants. It had 1 yellow star and 8 planets. The 3rd planet from the star was inhabited by an intelligent species that called themselves humans. Initial scans had classified their homeworld as a Category 7 death world. Kethvora read the classification with interest. Category 7 was unusually high. Most death worlds fell in the Category 3 to Category 5 range. A Category 7 planet was a place of extreme danger. The survey report described a world with massive oceans of salt water, unstable tectonic plates that caused constant earthquakes, and a wildly variable climate that ranged from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. The planet was struck by violent storms, bombarded by radiation from its star, and populated by millions of species that spent most of their time trying to eat each other. The surveyor who had written the report had requested psychological counseling after completing it. Kethvora set the report aside. It was interesting, but not concerning. A harsh planet might produce tough creatures, but toughness alone did not win wars. The humans had achieved spaceflight. According to the report, they had colonies on several moons and orbital stations throughout their system. They had developed basic energy weapons and primitive faster-than-light technology. None of this mattered. The Vethkai had better weapons, better ships, and 400 years of experience in conquest. The humans would fall like all the others. Kethvora summoned his aide, a young officer named Yethnal, and gave him the order. "Prepare a subjugation fleet," Kethvora said. "Standard composition. We will bring these humans into the Dominion." Yethnal bowed and left to carry out the order. Kethvora returned to looking at the stars. He did not give the humans another thought. This was his first mistake. Far across the galaxy, on the third planet of the Sol system, humanity had already made its decision. They had known about the Vethkai for 50 years. It had started with a single intercepted transmission, caught by a deep space listening post on the edge of the solar system. The transmission was not meant for human ears. It was a routine military communication between two Vethkai scout ships, discussing the boundaries of their patrol routes. Human scientists had spent 5 years decoding the language. When they finally understood what they were hearing, they went very quiet. The transmission mentioned the conquest of a species called the Rethvani. It mentioned the destruction of their homeworld. It mentioned the number of casualties, 4 billion dead, with the same casual tone that a human might use to discuss the weather. Humanity had faced many threats in its long history. Ice ages, plagues, asteroids, wars, nuclear weapons, climate change. They had survived all of these through a combination of stubbornness, creativity, and an absolute refusal to accept extinction. Now they faced a new threat, the greatest they had ever encountered. An alien empire that had destroyed entire civilizations, an enemy that was coming for them, whether they wanted it or not. The governments of Earth met in secret. They argued for months. Some wanted to reach out to the Vethkai, to try diplomacy, to seek peace. Others pointed out that the Vethkai had never shown mercy to any species they had encountered. The intercepted transmissions made it clear that the Dominion did not negotiate with lesser species. They conquered them or destroyed them. There was no third option. In the end, humanity chose a third option anyway. They would prepare for war. Not the kind of war they had fought among themselves for thousands of years. Not a war of nations and borders and resources. This would be a war for survival. A war against an enemy that had never been defeated. A war that they might not win, but they would fight it anyway. Because that was what humans did. The preparations began immediately and continued for 50 years. On the surface, life on Earth went on as normal. People were born, grew up, fell in love, had children, grew old, and died. They worked and played and worried about the small problems of daily life. Most of them had no idea what was happening in the secret facilities buried deep underground, or in the hidden shipyards carved into asteroids, or in the research stations disguised as mining operations in the outer solar system. A new generation of weapons was developed. Railguns that could accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of the speed of light. Missiles with artificial intelligence that could think and adapt and hunt their targets across vast distances. Energy shields that could absorb punishment that would vaporize conventional armor. Engines that could push ships to accelerations that would kill any Vethkai crew instantly. This last development was humanity's secret advantage. The Vethkai could not survive high acceleration. Their bodies, evolved on a low-gravity paradise, could barely tolerate 2 times normal gravity without medical support. Anything higher would cause their internal organs to fail and their bones to shatter. Humans were different. The human body was a remarkable machine, forged by millions of years of evolution on a planet that never stopped trying to kill it. Humans could survive accelerations that would reduce a Vethkai to paste. Their bones were dense and strong. Their muscles were powerful. Their hearts could pump blood even under tremendous pressure. With proper training and equipment, a human pilot could operate at 12 times normal gravity. For short periods, they could survive even more. This meant that human ships could move in ways that Vethkai ships could not. They could accelerate faster, turn harder, and react more quickly. In a battle between equally matched vessels, the human ship would always have the advantage of mobility. But humanity did not plan to fight with equally matched vessels. They planned to fight with overwhelming force. The shipyards worked constantly, hidden from any watching eyes. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, cruisers, thousands of vessels, built in secret, crewed by volunteers who knew they might never see their families again. The pilots trained in simulators that reproduced the crushing acceleration of combat. The soldiers drilled in zero gravity, learning to fight in the cold vacuum of space. The engineers perfected their weapons, making them more deadly with each passing year. And through it all, humanity watched and waited. They intercepted more transmissions from the Vethkai. They learned everything they could about their enemy. They studied their tactics, their technology, their psychology. They discovered the Dominion's great weakness, their arrogance. The Vethkai had won so many times that they had forgotten how to lose. They had become predictable, following the same patterns of conquest that had worked for 400 years. They never adapted because they never needed to. Humanity would make them need to. The waiting ended on a spring morning, Earth time. A sensor station on the edge of the solar system detected a fleet of alien vessels emerging from faster-than-light travel. The ships matched the profiles in the intercepted transmissions. Vethkai, 112 warships, a standard subjugation fleet. The message was relayed to Earth Command in less than a minute. Across the planet and throughout the solar system, alerts began to sound in hidden facilities. Men and women who had trained for this moment their entire lives stopped what they were doing and went to their stations. Engines that had been cold for years began to warm up. Weapons that had never been fired were loaded and aimed. Humanity took a deep breath and prepared for war. But they did not attack immediately. The plan called for patience. Let the Vethkai come. Let them see the colonies, the stations, the obvious targets. Let them think that Earth was just another primitive civilization, another easy conquest. Let them underestimate humanity until it was too late. The Vethkai fleet moved through the outer solar system without resistance. They passed the gas giants and the ice dwarfs. They scanned the human colonies and orbital stations, cataloging targets for destruction. They sent reports back to High Admiral Keth Vora, confirming what he already believed. The humans were primitive. Their technology was inferior. Their defenses were laughable. Victory would be swift and total. Keth Vora read the reports and approved the standard subjugation protocol. First, destroy the outer colonies to demonstrate power. Then, approach the homeworld and demand surrender. If the humans refused, destroy their cities one by one until they changed their minds. If they still refused, exterminate them completely and move on to the next target. It had worked 1,203 times before. It would work again. The subjugation fleet approached the first target, a human colony on a moon called Titan. The colony was small, perhaps 10,000 inhabitants, built into the ice beneath the moon's thick atmosphere, a perfect target for demonstration. Fleet Commander Yethanal, now in charge of the operation, ordered his ships into attack formation. His weapons officers locked onto the colony. His communications officer prepared to broadcast the standard demand for surrender, translated into the humans' primitive language. The broadcast was never sent. A single human vessel emerged from behind Titan's bulk. It was small and ugly, a crude design with none of the elegant curves of Vethkai architecture. Yethnal watched it appear on his tactical display and felt a moment of contempt. One ship against 112. The humans were even more foolish than he had thought. He gave the order to destroy it. The human ship accelerated. Yethnal's tactical officer made a strange sound, something between a gasp and a scream. The numbers on his display were impossible. The human ship was accelerating at 12 times standard gravity. No crew could survive such force. The ship had to be automated, a drone of some kind. But the ship was not moving like a drone. Drones followed predictable patterns, executing pre-programmed maneuvers. This ship moved with purpose and creativity. It weaved between the Vethkai formation, avoiding weapons fire by margins so small that they should have been impossible. It was being piloted by something that could survive 12 gravities. The human ship opened fire. Its weapons were unlike anything in the Vethkai database. Railgun slugs traveling at speeds that defied tracking, missiles that changed course mid-flight, predicting evasive maneuvers before they happened. The first Vethkai cruiser exploded before its crew even understood they were under attack. The second followed 3 seconds later. Then the third. Then the fourth. Yethnal screamed orders at his officers. Concentrate fire. Bracket the target. Use overwhelming force. His ships responded, filling space with energy beams and explosive projectiles. The human vessel danced through the storm of destruction, taking hits that should have killed it, and continuing to fight. 7 Vethkai cruisers died in 11 minutes. Finally, a lucky shot breached the human ship's reactor. The vessel went dark, spinning out of control, trailing debris and atmosphere. Yethnal felt a moment of relief. It was over. They had won. Then his boarding team reported what they found in the wreckage. The pilot was still alive. The human was broken and bleeding, trapped in a crash couch designed to protect fragile bodies from impossible forces. Both of his legs were shattered. Several of his ribs had punctured his lungs. He was dying, and he knew it, but he was smiling. The Vethkai soldiers surrounded him, their weapons raised. their eyes wide with something that might have been fear. One of them activated a translation device and asked the human why he was smiling, why he had attacked an entire fleet with a single ship, why he had thrown his life away for nothing. The human laughed. Blood bubbled on his lips. His eyes, bright blue and filled with pain and something else, something fierce and joyful, met the eyes of his captors. "That was just the border patrol," he said. Then he died. Yethnal received the report and felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. It was not fear. The Vethkai did not feel fear. They had no need for such emotions. But it was something close, something that whispered warnings in a language he did not want to understand. He sent a message to High Admiral Kethvora requesting reinforcements. The request was granted. The second fleet was dispatched. Then the third. Then the eighth. More and more ships poured into the Sol system, and more ships died. The humans fought like nothing in Dominion history. They ejected into vacuum without suits and survived for minutes. They overloaded their own reactors to take enemies with them. They laughed as they died, and through it all, Earth remained untouched, waiting, preparing for what was coming next. The war had been going on for 3 months, and the Vethkai were learning what fear felt like. Fleet Commander Yethnal stood on the bridge of his new flagship and watched another squadron die. The human attack had come from nowhere, as they always did. A group of small ships had emerged from the shadow of an asteroid, fired their weapons in a coordinated burst that lasted less than 30 seconds, and then vanished back into the darkness before his fleet could respond. 3 cruisers destroyed, 500 crew members dead, and not a single human vessel lost. This was not how war was supposed to work. Yethnal had studied military history. He knew how conquests were meant to unfold. The superior force arrived. The inferior force recognized its position. Negotiations happened, or they did not. Either way, the outcome was determined by numbers and technology. The side with more ships and better weapons won. This was simple mathematics. It had never failed. The humans did not seem to understand mathematics. They refused to gather their forces for a proper battle. They refused to defend fixed positions. They refused to do anything that made sense. Instead, they attacked from ambush, struck vulnerable targets, and disappeared before retaliation could arrive. They used asteroids and moons and debris fields as cover. They turned the entire solar system into a maze of death, and they never stopped. Yethnal had destroyed 14 human vessels in the past month. His intelligence officers estimated that humanity had lost perhaps 1,000 soldiers. These were significant numbers. By all reasonable standards, the humans should be seeking peace. Their position was hopeless. They could not win, but they kept fighting. Worse, they were getting better. The first human attacks had been brave but clumsy. The pilots had taken unnecessary risks, made tactical errors, died when they could have survived. Now the attacks were precise and professional. The humans were learning from every engagement, adapting their tactics, improving their technology. Each battle made them more dangerous than the last. Yethnal did not understand how this was possible. The Vethkai had 400 years of experience. They had perfected their methods of warfare over countless campaigns. How could these primitives from a death world improve so quickly? The answer came from an unexpected source. A human pilot had been captured during a recent engagement. Her ship had been disabled by a lucky hit to the engines, and she had been taken alive before she could trigger her self-destruct system. She was brought before Yethnal for interrogation. Her name was Commander Sarah Chen. She was 34 years old. She had been flying combat missions since the war began. According to her ship's records, she had personally destroyed 11 Vethkai vessels. Yethnal looked at her and tried to understand what he was seeing. She was small by human standards, barely reaching his chest. Her body was compact and muscular, designed for efficiency rather than elegance. Her skin was a warm brown color, marked with scars and burns from previous battles. Her eyes were dark and calm, watching him without any sign of fear. This confused Yethnal. Prisoners were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to beg for mercy, to offer information in exchange for their lives, to recognize that their situation was hopeless. Chen did none of these things. She sat in her restraints and looked at him as if he were the one in danger. "You have lost," Yethnal told her. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your colonies are burning. Your homeworld will fall within months. Why do you continue to fight?" Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. You really don't understand, do you? Explain it to me. Your kind has been winning for 400 years. You've conquered over 1,000 civilizations. You think that makes you strong, but it doesn't. It makes you weak. Yethnal felt a flash of anger. Weak? We have destroyed your outer colonies. We have killed thousands of your soldiers. We control your entire system, except for the third planet. And how many ships have you lost? Yethnal said nothing. The number was not something he wanted to think about. The subjugation of Sol had cost more vessels than any campaign in Dominion history. The reinforcements kept coming, but they were dying faster than they could arrive. Chen continued as if she could read his thoughts. You've never fought anyone like us. All your previous conquests were against species that gave up when the odds turned against them. They calculated their chances of survival, realized they couldn't win, and surrendered. That's the logical thing to do. It is the sensible thing to do. Yethnal agreed. Humans aren't sensible. We're stubborn. We come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day of our evolution. Ice ages, predators, diseases, natural disasters, everything on our world wanted us dead. And we survived anyway. Not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we never gave up. Ever. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with an intensity that made Yethnal want to step back. You want to know why we keep fighting? Because we don't know how to stop. It's not in our nature. Our ancestors faced extinction a dozen times, and every single time, they chose to keep going. They fought and struggled and died, and then their children fought and struggled and died, and eventually, they won. That's who we are. That's what you're up against. Yethnal processed this information. It matched what his intelligence officers had been telling him. The humans had a word for this quality: defiance. Their history was filled with stories of individuals and groups who had chosen death over submission. They celebrated this behavior. They taught it to their children. They considered it a virtue. To the Vethkai, it seemed like madness. You cannot defeat us, Yethnal said. Our resources are limitless. Our empire spans thousands of systems. Even if you kill every ship we send, we will simply send more. I know, Chen said. We've always known. We're not trying to defeat you. Not yet. Then what are you trying to do? We're buying time. Yethnal felt that cold sensation again. The one that was not quite fear. Time for what? Chen's smile widened. You'll find out. She said nothing more. Yethnal ordered her taken to a holding cell and returned to his command duties. But her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind during the quiet hours when he should have been resting. Buying time. Time for what? The answer began to reveal itself over the following weeks. The human attacks continued, but they changed in character. Instead of striking randomly at whatever targets presented themselves, they began to focus on specific objectives: supply convoys, communication relays, sensor stations. The humans were systematically dismantling the Vethkai ability to coordinate and supply their forces. At the same time, human ships began appearing in places they should not have been able to reach. They attacked patrols in the outer system, hundreds of millions of kilometers from any known human base. They ambushed convoys in transit, intercepting them at points that should have been impossible to predict. They seemed to know exactly where the Vethkai forces would be before they arrived. Yethnal ordered a comprehensive review of his communication security. What he found made his blood run cold. The humans had broken Vethkai encryption. Not just broken it, mastered it. They had been reading every message, every order, every intelligence report for months. They knew the position of every Vethkai ship. They knew the timing of every supply convoy. They knew the contents of every strategic discussion. And they had used this knowledge to devastating effect. The mathematics of the war suddenly looked very different. The Vethkai were not fighting a desperate enemy making random attacks. They were fighting a coordinated campaign designed with perfect intelligence. Every human life lost had been spent deliberately, traded for maximum damage to the Dominion forces. Yethnal immediately ordered new encryption protocols implemented. But he knew it was already too late. The humans had learned too much. They had been inside his head, watching his every thought, and he had never suspected. He began to wonder what else they were hiding. The answer came on the 93rd day of the war. A Vethkai scout ship on routine patrol near the gas giant called Jupiter detected something strange. A heat signature in a region of space that should have been empty. The scout moved closer to investigate. scanning carefully for any sign of human ships. What it found was not a ship, it was a shipyard, hidden in the radiation shadow of Jupiter's largest moon. Disguised by carefully positioned reflective screens and heat sinks, the humans had built a facility the size of a small city. Massive construction frames held the skeletons of warships in various stages of completion. Cargo vessels moved between sections, carrying materials and components. Thousands of workers in armored suits crawled over the structures like ants on a hill. The scout ship counted the vessels under construction, then counted again, because the first number seemed impossible. 87 warships, each one larger than anything the humans had fielded so far. Battleships, carriers, dreadnoughts. A fleet that would rival the Dominion forces currently in the system. The scout transmitted its findings and was destroyed by human interceptors 30 seconds later. But the damage was done. The message reached Yethnal. The message reached Kethvora. The message reached the high command of the Vethkai Dominion. The humans were building an armada. This changed everything. The Vethkai strategy had been based on the assumption that humanity's industrial capacity was limited. Destroy their colonies, blockade their homeworld, and they would eventually run out of ships and ammunition. But the Jupiter facility proved that assumption wrong. The humans had been building in secret for years, maybe decades. The forces currently fighting were not their full strength. They were a delaying action, buying time, Chen had said. Now Yethnal understood. High Admiral Kethvora arrived in the Sol system personally, aboard a massive warship called the Final Judgment. He brought with him the largest fleet ever assembled in Dominion history, 400 vessels, crewed by the most experienced officers in the Empire. His orders were simple. Find and destroy all human shipbuilding facilities, then crush the human homeworld before their fleet could be completed. The humans responded by accelerating their attacks. They struck at supply lines with renewed ferocity. They targeted command ships and communication relays. They used suicide tactics, ramming their vessels into Vethkai formations when their weapons were exhausted. The Dominion advance slowed to a crawl, every kilometer bought with blood and fire, and still the shipyards worked. The humans had more facilities than the one near Jupiter. There were bases hidden in asteroid fields, factories buried beneath the ice of distant moons, construction platforms disguised as civilian stations. The Vethkai found them and destroyed them, one by one. But for every shipyard they eliminated, 2 more finished their work. The human fleet was growing faster than the Vethkai could stop it. Kethvora studied the intelligence reports and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of command. Doubt. The mathematics of conquest, which had never failed, were failing now. Every calculation, every projection, every model suggested that the humans should have been defeated months ago. But they were still fighting, still building, still growing stronger. He ordered a full intelligence analysis of humanity, not just their military capabilities, but their history, their culture, their psychology. He needed to understand what he was facing. He needed to know why these creatures from a Category 7 Deathworld were defying every expectation. The analysis took 2 weeks to complete. When Kethvora read it, he understood why his subordinates had delayed delivering it. The report described a species that should not exist. Humans had evolved as persistence predators. This was a hunting strategy so rare and so brutal that the Vethkai had no word for it. Most predators relied on speed or strength or stealth to catch their prey. Humans relied on endurance. They would find a target and simply follow it, walking steadily, never stopping, never resting, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. It could take hours. It could take days. It did not matter. Humans would keep walking. This strategy required physical adaptations that the Vethkai found horrifying. Humans could regulate their body temperature through sweating, allowing them to remain active in conditions that would kill other species. Their skeletal structure was designed for long-distance movement, with shock-absorbing joints and efficient energy transfer. Their cardiovascular system could operate at high intensity for extended periods without failure. But the physical adaptations were less important than the psychological ones. Persistence hunting required patience. It required absolute dedication to a goal. It required the ability to ignore pain and fatigue, and the voice in your head telling you to stop. Humans had evolved these traits over millions of years, until they became part of the species' fundamental nature. They did not give up. They did not stop. They did not surrender. These concepts were foreign to the deepest levels of their psychology. The report went on to describe human history. And this was where Kethvora truly began to understand what he was facing. Humans had fought each other constantly throughout their existence. War was not an occasional event for them, but a continuous state. They had developed weapons of devastating power, including devices that could destroy entire cities in a single explosion. They had used these weapons on each other. They had killed hundreds of millions of their own kind in conflicts over territory and resources and ideology. And yet, they had survived. Not just survived, but thrived. Their population had grown to 8 billion individuals. They had spread across their solar system. They had built civilizations and technologies that rivaled anything the Vethkai possessed. They were not primitive. They were not broken. They were exactly what a Category 7 Deathworld would produce if given enough time. They were apex predators, and the Vethkai had made them angry. Kethvora set down the report and looked out at the stars. For the first time in his long life, he was not certain of victory. The humans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting with the full fury of a species that had spent its entire existence struggling against impossible odds. They had turned their planet's hostility into strength. They had transformed their brutal history into experience. They knew how to fight. They knew how to suffer. They knew how to endure. And they were just getting started. The message arrived from Earth the next day. It was transmitted on all frequencies, in all languages, impossible to ignore or intercept. You have attacked our colonies. You have killed our people. We gave you the chance to withdraw. You did not take it. What follows is not war. It is consequence. The Armada launches in 30 cycles. Kethvora read the message 3 times. Then he began preparing his defenses. He had 30 days to stop whatever the humans were planning. He had a terrible feeling that it would not be enough. High Admiral Kethvora had not slept in 6 days. Sleep was important for the Vethkai. Their bodies required regular rest cycles to function properly. Without sleep, their minds became slow, and their judgment suffered. Kethvora knew this. He understood that he was operating at reduced capacity, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the numbers. 30 days, until the human Armada launched. 29 now. 28. Each cycle that passed brought them closer to something that Kethvora did not want to name. He had fought wars for 300 years. He had never been afraid of any enemy, but the humans had put something cold and heavy in his chest, something that pressed against his heart and made breathing difficult. He would not call it fear. He refused to call it fear. The Dominion fleet had gathered in defensive positions around the inner solar system. 400 warships, the largest force ever assembled under a single command. They had created overlapping fields of fire, established kill zones, deployed weapons platforms capable of cracking moons. Any attacking force would have to fight through layer after layer of destruction to reach them. It should have been more than enough. The humans, according to all intelligence estimates, could field perhaps 200 vessels, half the Dominion numbers. The mathematics were clear, but the mathematics had been clear at the beginning of this war, too. And the mathematics had been wrong. Kethvora stood in his command center and reviewed the latest intelligence reports. His officers moved around him, speaking in hushed voices, avoiding his eyes. They could feel the change in him. The certainty that had defined his command for 3 centuries was gone, replaced by something harder and more desperate. "Admiral," said his intelligence chief, a careful female named Vethsara, "we have completed the cultural analysis you requested. Show me." Vethsara activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air, scenes from human history, translated documents, statistical analyses. Kethvora studied them with the intense focus of someone looking for a weapon. "Human warfare differs fundamentally from our own," Vethsara began. "They do not fight for conquest or resources, as we do. They fight for concepts, abstract ideas that they consider worth dying for." "What kinds of concepts?" "Freedom, honor, revenge, loyalty to family and tribe, the defense of their young." Vethsara paused, choosing her words carefully. "They have a word that does not translate well into our language. The closest equivalent would be home. It refers not just to a physical location, but to an emotional attachment to a place and the people in it. Humans will fight to the death to protect their home. It is not rational behavior, but it is universal among them." Kethvora considered this. "We are threatening their home, their planet." "Yes, Admiral. And according to our analysis, this will make them more dangerous, not less. When humans perceive a threat to their home, They do not calculate odds or consider surrender. They enter a psychological state that their scientists call fight or flight. In this state, their bodies become stronger and faster. Their pain tolerance increases, and their fear is replaced by aggression. They become more effective fighters when cornered, significantly more effective. Our tactical models have been adjusted to account for this factor. Vethsara's voice dropped slightly. The results are not encouraging. Kethvora waved his hand, dismissing the topic. What else? Their social structure is complex. They organize themselves into groups of varying sizes, from family units to nations of hundreds of millions. These groups compete with each other, sometimes violently, but when faced with an external threat, they have a remarkable ability to set aside their differences and cooperate. They call this unity in adversity. We have seen this, Kethvora said. Their forces operate with high coordination despite coming from different territories. Yes, but the analysis suggests we have not seen the full extent of this behavior. Historical records show that humans have united their entire species only a few times in their history. Each time, it was in response to an existential threat. Each time, the results were transformative. They developed new technologies, reorganized their societies, and achieved outcomes that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. And we have provided them with an existential threat, the greatest their species has ever faced. According to our projections, humanity is currently operating at maximum unity. Every resource, every factory, every individual is contributing to the war effort. They have not achieved this level of cooperation in their entire history. Kethvora was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. What are our chances of victory? Vethsara hesitated. This was the question that every officer in the fleet had been asking, and none had wanted to answer. If we engage their armada in open battle, our models predict a 60% chance of victory. However, this assumes that we have accurate information about their fleet composition and capabilities. And if we do not, then the projections become uncertain. The humans have demonstrated an ability to surprise us repeatedly. They may have weapons or tactics that we have not anticipated. They may have more ships than our estimates suggest. They may. Enough. Kethvora raised his hand. I understand. Continue with the cultural analysis. Vethsara nodded and returned to her display. There is one more factor that we consider significant. The human concept of sacrifice. New images appeared on the screen. Historical scenes of humans giving their lives for causes, for other individuals, for ideas. Soldiers throwing themselves on explosives to protect their companions, civilians rushing into danger to save strangers, parents dying to protect their children. Humans place an extremely high value on the survival of their group, Vethsara explained. Higher, in many cases, than the value they place on their own survival. They will willingly die if they believe their death will help others. This behavior is reinforced by their culture, their religions, and their social structures. It is considered the highest form of honor. We have seen this as well, Kethvora said, thinking of the human pilots who had rammed their ships into Vethkai formations. They do not fear death. They fear death, but they fear the failure of their species more. And this gives them an advantage that we cannot match. The display changed again, showing a single image. It was a human soldier, standing on a pile of rubble, holding a weapon in one hand and a flag in the other. The image was from their planet's history, from one of their many wars. The soldier was clearly exhausted, clearly wounded, clearly outnumbered, but his face showed no fear, only determination. This image is famous in human culture, Vethsara said. It represents something they call defiance, the refusal to surrender even when victory is impossible. They do not see this as foolishness. They see it as the highest expression of their nature. Kethvora studied the image for a long time. The human soldier stared back at him across the centuries, challenging him to understand. They will not surrender, Kethvora said finally. No, Admiral, they will not. Even if we destroy their armada, even if we burn their cities, even if we kill 90% of their population, they will keep fighting. That is our assessment. Kethvora turned away from the display. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. The universe that had seemed so ordered, so predictable, now felt chaotic and dangerous. He had spent his entire life believing that the Vethkai were the natural rulers of the cosmos. That victory was their birthright. That no species could stand against them. He had been wrong. The humans were not like the other species the Dominion had conquered. They were not gentle creatures from garden worlds who had stumbled into space travel and could be intimidated into submission. They were predators from a world that made the Vethkai homeworld look like a nursery. They had evolved to fight, to struggle, to survive against impossible odds. And they had been preparing for this war for 50 years. How did we miss this? Kethvora asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We have surveyed thousands of systems. We have encountered hundreds of Deathworld species. How did we not understand what Earth would produce? Vethsara approached him carefully. Our models were based on incorrect assumptions. We believed that harsh environments produced inferior species, creatures too focused on survival to develop advanced civilization. This was true for most Deathworlds we encountered, but not for Earth. Earth is different. The challenges it presented were not constant. They changed over time, forcing the humans to adapt repeatedly. They survived ice ages that should have killed them. They survived diseases that killed most of their population. They survived each other, despite possessing weapons capable of ending their entire species. Each challenge made them stronger, more resilient, more dangerous. They are the survivors of survivors, Kethvora said. Yes, for millions of years, only the most adaptable, most intelligent, most determined humans lived to reproduce. We are facing the result of that selection process. A species optimized for survival against any threat. Kethvora closed his eyes. The weight of 300 years pressed down on him. All his victories, all his conquests, all his certainties had led him to this moment, to a war he was no longer sure he could win. What would you recommend? He asked. Vethsara was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and measured. Withdrawal. Kethvora turned to look at her. In all his years of command, no subordinate had ever suggested retreat. It was not something the Vethkai did. It was not something they had ever needed to do. Explain. The humans have issued their warning. The Armada launches in 26 cycles. We could leave before it arrives. Return to Dominion space. Establish a defensive perimeter around our territory, and avoid further contact with humanity, and abandon 400 years of expansion. Accept our first defeat in the history of the Dominion. Accept survival, Admiral. The analysis is clear. If we fight the humans to the end, one of our species will be destroyed. I do not believe it will be them. Kethvora said nothing. He looked out at the stars and thought about everything he had learned. The persistence predators who never stopped hunting. The survivors of survivors who could not be broken. The defiant soldiers who would rather die than surrender. And he thought about his own people. The gentle Vethkai who had risen to power on a paradise world, who had conquered the galaxy because no one had been able to stop them, who had never faced an enemy that truly threatened their existence. For the first time, he wondered if the Vethkai deserved to rule the stars. They had built their empire on the suffering of others, destroying civilizations that refused to submit, exterminating species that dared to resist. They had done this because they could, because they were strong and others were weak, but they were not strong. They had never been tested. They had won their victories against opponents who were already broken, already defeated by their own gentle natures. The Vethkai had never fought anyone who was truly willing to die rather than kneel, until now. I will not retreat, Kethvora said finally. The Dominion does not retreat. If I order a withdrawal, the High Council will remove me from command and send someone else to finish this war. The result will be the same. We will fight the humans. We will discover if 400 years of victory have made us as strong as we believe. And if they have not? Kethvora did not answer. Instead, he turned back to the viewport and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, the human armada was gathering. Thousands of ships crewed by millions of soldiers, all of them ready to die for their species. 26 days. Then the universe would learn who deserved to survive. The message arrived on the 25th day. It came directly from Earth, transmitted on an open channel that anyone could receive. The voice spoke in the language of the Vethkai, translated by human technology but carrying the weight of human emotion. This is Admiral Helena Stone of the United Earth Defense Force, the voice said. I am speaking to High Admiral Kethvora and all members of the Vethkai Dominion. Kethvora listened in his command center, surrounded by his officers. Every ship in the Dominion fleet was receiving the same message. For 400 years, Your empire has spread across the galaxy. You have conquered thousands of worlds. You have destroyed species that refused to submit. You believed that you were the natural rulers of the universe, that nothing could stand against you. A pause. Then the voice continued, harder and colder than before. You were wrong. We are humanity. We are the children of Earth. We come from a world that has tried to kill us every single day of our existence. We have survived ice and fire, plague and famine, flood and drought. We have survived predators that wanted to eat us, and parasites that wanted to consume us from within. We have survived ourselves, our own violence and hatred and fear. We have survived everything, and we will survive you. Your fleet is powerful. Your technology is advanced. Your numbers are greater than ours. These things do not matter. We have faced worse odds before. We have fought battles that we had no chance of winning, and we won them anyway. We have built our civilization on the bones of everything that tried to destroy us. You asked us to surrender. We refused. You burned our colonies. We mourned our dead and kept fighting. You brought your largest fleet to crush us. We built a larger one. Tomorrow, we come for you. You have one final chance. Leave our system. Return to your territory. Never threaten humanity again. If you do this, we will let you go. We do not want war. We do not enjoy killing. We are tired of death. But if you stay, you will learn what 400 years of peace have hidden from you. You will learn what happens when you corner a species that has been fighting for survival since before your ancestors left their oceans. You will learn what it means to face the full fury of 8 billion humans who have nothing left to lose. The choice is yours. Make it wisely. The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center. Kethvora looked at his officers. Some of them were trembling. Others had faces as still as stone. All of them were waiting for his response. He thought about retreat. He thought about survival. He thought about everything he had learned about the humans and their terrible, beautiful determination. Then he thought about the Dominion, about the empire that had stood for 400 years, about the thousands of species that watched and waited to see if the Vethkai could be defeated. If he retreated now, the Dominion would not survive the shame. Other conquered species would rise up. Other civilizations would challenge them. Everything they had built would crumble. The Vethkai had created their empire by never showing weakness. If they showed it now, they would have nothing. We stay, Kethvora said. We fight. May the universe forgive us for what is about to happen. 24 hours later, the human armada arrived, and the stars themselves began to tremble. The first thing that broke was the sensor array. Kethvora's tactical officer, a veteran of 60 campaigns named Yethnal, who had been promoted after his predecessor's nervous collapse, was monitoring the edge of the solar system when his instruments stopped making sense. The readings showed massive energy signatures emerging from faster-than-light travel, but the numbers were impossible. The array must have malfunctioned. There could not be that many ships. He reset the system and tried again. The numbers got worse. Admiral, he said, his voice cracking. The humans are here. Kethvora crossed to the tactical display and looked at the readings. For a long moment, he said nothing. His skin, which normally shifted colors with his emotions, went completely still and gray. Count them, he ordered. Yethnal's hands trembled as he worked the controls. The sensor array struggled to track individual vessels in the massive formation. Minutes passed. The numbers climbed. 3,427 confirmed vessels. Yethnal finally reported. Additional signatures still resolving. Estimate final count of 4,000 or more. 4,000 ships. 10 times the number that intelligence had predicted. 10 times the size of the Dominion fleet. Impossible. The word echoed through Kethvora's mind. Impossible. The humans could not have built so many vessels in secret, could not have hidden them from Dominion sensors, could not have crewed them with trained personnel, could not have armed them with weapons, could not have done any of this. But they had. The human armada spread across the tactical display like a storm cloud covering the sky. Carriers the size of small moons, surrounded by swarms of fighter craft, battleships bristling with weapon emplacements, destroyers and cruisers and frigates in formations that spoke of countless hours of training, dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Dominion fleet, their hulls decorated with symbols and words that Kethvora could not read but somehow understood. They were warnings, threats, promises of violence, and at the center of the formation, One ship larger than all the others. A massive fortress of metal and fury, covered with weapons and armor and engines that glowed with barely contained power. The flagship of the human Armada, the command vessel of Admiral Helena Stone. Its name was painted on the hull in letters that burned with reflected starlight. Defiance. All ships report ready, Keth Vora's communications officer said. Awaiting your orders, Admiral. Keth Vora looked at his fleet. 400 vessels that had seemed so powerful just hours ago. 400 experienced crews who had never known defeat. 400 ships that were about to learn what defeat felt like. He could retreat. Even now, with the human Armada bearing down on them, he could order his fleet to withdraw. The humans might not pursue. They had said they did not want war. They might let the Vethkai go. But Keth Vora knew that retreat was no longer an option. Not because of pride or duty or the expectations of the High Council, but because the humans would not let them go. Not really. The Dominion had shown that it was willing to exterminate entire species. The humans would never feel safe while the Vethkai existed. This war would continue until one side or the other was destroyed. Better to fight here, where the Dominion had prepared defenses and established positions. Better to make the humans pay for every kilometer they advanced. Better to die with honor than to run and be hunted down like prey. All ships, Keth Vora said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hearts. Engage the enemy. The Battle of Saul began with fire. The Dominion weapons platforms opened up first, unleashing a barrage of energy beams and missiles that should have devastated any approaching fleet. The firepower was immense, capable of destroying moons, scorching planets, ending civilizations. The human Armada flew straight into it. Ships exploded in the first seconds of contact. Human vessels vanished in balls of fire and debris, their crews dying before they could react. Dozens of them. Scores. 100. The Dominion officers watched their displays with grim satisfaction. This was how war was supposed to work. Superior firepower destroying inferior enemies. But the humans did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not break formation or scatter or retreat. They accelerated. The human ships pushed their engines to maximum power, racing toward the Dominion positions at speeds that should have been impossible. They absorbed the punishment from the weapons platforms and kept coming. When their shields failed, they kept coming. When their hulls breached and their crews died in the vacuum, they kept coming. And then they were through the outer defenses, and the real battle began. Keth Vora had studied human tactics for months. He had prepared his fleet for their speed, their aggression, their willingness to take losses. He had established overlapping fields of fire and coordinated defense zones. He had done everything right. None of it mattered. The humans did not fight like any enemy the Vethkai had ever faced. They did not form neat lines or follow predictable patterns. They swarmed like insects, attacking from every direction at once. Small ships darted between larger vessels, drawing fire and creating openings. Bombers made attack runs on Dominion cruisers, launching torpedoes at point-blank range and spinning away before the return fire could catch them. Fighters engaged in dogfights that filled space with burning wreckage, and through it all, the human battleships advanced, their massive guns tearing through Dominion defenses like claws through flesh. The first Dominion cruiser to fall was the Eternal Vigilance. Its shields collapsed under concentrated fire from 3 human destroyers, and then a wave of missiles struck its engine section. The explosion was visible from across the battle zone, a brief sun that marked the death of 800 crew members. The second cruiser fell 30 seconds later, then the third, then the fourth. Keth Vora watched his fleet die around him and felt the ground of his certainties crumbling beneath his feet. His ships were fighting well. They were scoring hits, destroying human vessels, following their training. But for every human ship they killed, 2 more took its place. The Armada was simply too large, too fast, too aggressive. Admiral, his tactical officer said, his voice hollow. We have lost 87 vessels. Human losses estimated at 230. They are breaking through our outer perimeter. 87 ships. 20% of his fleet, gone in less than an hour. At this rate, the Dominion force would be destroyed within 4 hours. Maybe 3. Pull back to the secondary defensive line, Keth Vora ordered. All ships, concentrate fire on their capital vessels. Ignore the small craft. The order was executed, but it changed nothing. The human Armada adapted instantly, repositioning their forces to counter the new Dominion tactics. They sent their smaller ships forward in waves, absorbing the concentrated fire while their battleships maneuvered into optimal attack positions. It was as if they could read Kethvora's mind, anticipating his orders before he gave them. Then he remembered. They had broken Vethkai encryption months ago. They probably knew his tactical doctrines better than his own officers did. He ordered emergency communication protocols, switching to backup systems that should be secure. It helped a little. The humans adapted a little slower, but they still adapted. They still pressed forward. They still killed his ships faster than he could kill theirs. 3 hours into the battle, the Dominion fleet had been reduced to 212 vessels. The humans had lost approximately 600, but they still had more than 3,000 ships on the field, and more were arriving every hour. Reinforcements from hidden bases, from secret facilities, from a manufacturing capacity that the Dominion had never suspected existed. Kethvora realized that he was not fighting a battle. He was fighting a species. The entire human civilization had mobilized for this war. Every factory, every shipyard, every able-bodied adult had contributed something to the Armada. The ships he was fighting were not just military assets. They were the combined determination of 8 billion beings who refused to be conquered, and they were magnificent, even through his despair. Kethvora could not help but admire what he was seeing. The human pilots flew their ships with a skill and creativity that defied belief. They took impossible shots, made impossible maneuvers, survived impacts that should have destroyed them. Their coordination was perfect, their communication flawless. They fought like a single organism with thousands of bodies, each one knowing exactly what the others were doing. This was what a death world produced. This was what millions of years of evolution had created. A species so optimized for survival that even the mightiest empire in the galaxy could not destroy them. The end came slowly, and then all at once. Kethvora's flagship, the Eternal Certainty, took its first major hit 6 hours into the battle. A human dreadnought named Revenge caught them in a crossfire with 2 heavy cruisers. The Certainty's shields held, but barely. The second salvo breached the hull in 3 places. The third killed the engine room crew and reduced their speed by half. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Put it through." Admiral Helena Stone's face appeared on the screen. She was older than Kethvora had expected, with gray hair cut short and a face marked by years of stress and responsibility. But her eyes were sharp and alert, and her voice carried the calm authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Hi, Admiral Kethvora," she said. "Your fleet has fought well. Your crews have died with honor. But this battle is over. Surrender now and we will spare your remaining vessels. Continue fighting and you will be destroyed. The choice is yours." Kethvora looked at the tactical display. 143 Dominion ships remained. The humans still had nearly 3,000. The mathematics were final. "What are your terms?" he asked. "Unconditional surrender of all Dominion forces in this system. You and your surviving officers will be taken into custody and transported to Earth for trial. Your crews will be disarmed and held as prisoners of war until the larger conflict is resolved. Your ships will be impounded. And if I refuse," Stone's expression did not change, "then we will destroy your fleet down to the last ship. We will pursue any vessels that attempt to escape and destroy them too. And then we will take our Armada to your homeworld and ask the same question to whoever is in charge there." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The humans had the power to do exactly what she described. And Kethvora knew, with absolute certainty, that they would do it if he forced them to. He thought about the officers and crew on his remaining ships, 10,000 Vethkai who had followed him into this battle, trusting his judgment, believing in his leadership. They had fought bravely. They had done everything he had asked. Now their lives rested in his hands. 300 years of victories had not prepared him for this moment. The Dominion had never surrendered. They had never needed to. They had always won. But the Dominion had never faced the children of Earth. "I accept your terms," Kethvora said. "All Dominion vessels will stand down and await your boarding parties." "A wise decision, Admiral. Your surrender will be remembered." The transmission ended. Kethvora gave the order to cease fire. Across the battle zone, the remaining Dominion ships went dark, their weapons powering down, their crews preparing for capture. The Battle of Sol was over. The Vethkai Dominion had suffered its first defeat in 400 years, but the war was not finished. Not yet. The human boarding parties arrived within the hour. Kethvora watched them approach on his external sensors. Dozens of small craft carrying soldiers in armored suits. They moved with the same efficiency and coordination that characterized everything the humans did. Within minutes, they had breached the Certainty's airlocks and begun securing the ship. The first humans Kethvora saw in person were a squad of Marines who entered his command center with weapons raised and eyes alert. They were shorter than him, but broader and more heavily muscled. Their armor was scarred and dented, showing the marks of recent combat. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their body language spoke of confidence and competence. They did not shoot. They did not threaten. They simply moved through the room with careful precision, disarming the Vethkai crew and securing critical systems. One of them approached Kethvora and removed their helmet. It was a woman. Her skin was dark, her hair was short, and her eyes were brown and tired. She had a scar on her left cheek that looked like it had been made by a blade. "High Admiral Kethvora," she said. "I am Major Nadia Okonkwo of the United Earth Marines. You are now a prisoner of war. You will be treated humanely in accordance with Earth conventions on the treatment of captured combatants. Do you understand?" "I understand," Kethvora said. "Do you have any medical needs that require immediate attention?" The question surprised him. He had expected brutality, or at least coldness. Instead, the human was asking about his health, as if she cared. "No," he said. "I am uninjured." "Good. Please come with me. Admiral Stone wishes to speak with you before you are transferred to a holding facility." Kethvora was led through the corridors of his own ship, past the bodies of crew members who had died in the battle and the survivors who were being rounded up by human soldiers. The Marines treated everyone with the same professional efficiency. They were not cruel. They were not gentle. They simply did their jobs. The meeting with Admiral Stone took place in the Certainty's main conference room. Stone was waiting when Kethvora arrived, standing at the head of the table with her hands clasped behind her back. She was smaller than he had expected, barely reaching his shoulder, but her presence filled the room. "Hi, Admiral," she said. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I did not realize I had a choice." "You always have a choice. That's the point." She gestured to a chair. Kethvora sat. Stone remained standing. "Your Dominion has conquered over 1,000 species in the past 4 centuries, Stone said. "You have destroyed entire civilizations that refused to submit. You came to our system expecting to do the same to us. Do you understand why you failed? Because you were stronger than we expected. Because your ships were better and your numbers were greater. No." Stone shook her head. "We won because we were willing to die. Every pilot in that Armada knew they might not survive today. They flew anyway. Every soldier on these boarding teams knew they might be killed. They came anyway. We did not win because we were stronger. We won because we were more determined." She walked around the table, her eyes never leaving Kethvora's face. "Your empire was built on fear. You conquered species because they were afraid to die. They looked at your fleets and your weapons and they calculated their chances of survival. When the numbers looked bad enough, they surrendered. You taught the galaxy that submission was the path to survival. It was rational," Kethvora said. "It was cowardice. And it created an empire of cowards, including you." The words stung, but Kethvora did not argue. She was right. He had never faced an enemy that truly threatened him. He had never had to dig deep and find the will to fight despite the odds. He had floated through 3 centuries of easy victories, believing that he was strong when he was simply unchallenged. "You have a choice," Stone continued. "Your Dominion has a choice. You can surrender unconditionally and face justice for your crimes. Your empire will be dismantled. Your conquered species will be freed. Your leaders will stand trial. But your people will survive. You will have the chance to become something better. And if we refuse, then we will come for you. We will bring our Armada to your homeworld, and your colonies, and every system you control. We will fight until one of us is destroyed. And I promise you, Admiral, it will not be us." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with an intensity that made Kethvora want to look away. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We have been fighting for our survival since our ancestors first stood upright. Your 4 centuries of victories mean nothing to us. We have been at war since the beginning of our species. You cannot outlast us. You cannot outfight us. You can only choose how this ends." Kethvora looked at this human woman. This creature from a Category 7 Deathworld who had just destroyed the greatest fleet in Dominion history. He saw the determination in her eyes, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. He understood, finally, what his intelligence reports had been trying to tell him. The humans did not fight because they thought they could win. They fought because they could not imagine doing anything else. They fought because fighting was what they were, and they were giving him a choice. After everything his people had done, all the species they had destroyed, all the civilizations they had exterminated, the humans were offering mercy, not because they were weak, because they were strong enough to be generous. "I will recommend that the High Council accept your terms," Kethvora said. "I cannot guarantee they will listen, but I will try." Stone nodded. "That's all we ask." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Admiral, for what it's worth, your fleet fought well. You lost because you faced something you had never encountered before. A species that would rather die than submit. Remember that. When you speak to your council, remember what it cost us to win this battle. Remember that we did not want this war, but we were willing to fight it, and we always will be." She left. Kethvora sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of his certainties, and wondered what kind of galaxy the humans would build on the ashes of his empire. The surrender came 17 days after the Battle of Sol. Kethvora had been returned to Dominion space under human escort, carrying a message from Admiral Stone and the evidence of what had happened to his fleet. The journey took 8 days at faster-than-light speeds, 8 days of silence, of staring at the walls of his cabin, of trying to find the words that would convince the High Council to accept defeat. He did not know if he could succeed. The Vethkai had never surrendered. The concept was foreign to their culture, their history, their very nature. For 400 years, they had been the conquerors. They had never imagined being the conquered. But Kethvora had seen the human armada. He had watched his fleet die around him. He had looked into the eyes of Admiral Stone and understood that the humans were not bluffing. They would come for the Dominion. They would bring their ships and their soldiers and their terrifying determination. And they would not stop until one side or the other was destroyed. The High Council met on Veth Prime, in the great chamber where all major decisions had been made for 10,000 years. 27 counselors, the most powerful individuals in the Dominion, sat in a circle around Kethvora as he gave his report. He told them everything: the size of the human armada, the speed and skill of their pilots, the unbreakable will of their soldiers, the offer of mercy that came with the promise of total war. He held nothing back. He did not try to minimize the defeat or suggest that victory might still be possible. He told them the truth, and the truth was simple. The humans were stronger. The Dominion could not win. The Council argued for 6 days. Some wanted to fight. They could not accept the idea of surrender. They spoke of honor and tradition, of the legacy of their ancestors, of the shame that would follow them through history if they submitted to a lesser species. They proposed desperate strategies, secret weapons, alliances with other civilizations that might stand against the human threat. Others were more practical. They had studied the intelligence reports. They had seen the recordings from the Battle of Sol. They understood that the humans were not a lesser species. They were something new, something terrifying, something that the Dominion had never encountered in 4 centuries of conquest, and some simply wanted to survive. The Dominion had built its power on the backs of conquered species. Those species were watching now, waiting to see what happened. If the Vethkai fought and lost, those conquered peoples would rise up. The Empire would tear itself apart from within. In the end, survival won. The vote was close, 15 to 12, but it was enough. The Vethkai Dominion accepted the human terms: unconditional surrender, dismantling of the military, liberation of all conquered species, war crime trials for leaders who had ordered the destruction of civilizations. Kethvora was among those put on trial. He stood before a panel of human judges and admitted everything: the species he had conquered, the civilizations he had destroyed, the billions of beings who had died under his command. He did not ask for mercy. He did not make excuses. He simply told the truth and accepted whatever judgment the humans saw fit to deliver. They did not execute him. They did not imprison him for life. Instead, they assigned him to a rehabilitation program, where former Dominion officers learned about the cultures they had destroyed and worked to make amends. He spent 10 years in that program, listening to survivors, studying the histories of extinct species, trying to understand the full scope of what his people had done. It changed him. Not slowly, but completely. The admiral who had commanded the destruction of 16 civilizations became something else. Something smaller and sadder, but also something more honest. He learned to feel shame. He learned to feel regret. He learned that victory without mercy was not victory at all. When the rehabilitation program ended, Kethvora returned to Veth Prime. But he did not retire. Instead, he became a teacher. He taught young Vethkai about the Dominion's history, not the glorious version they had learned as children, but the real version, the version with the suffering and the death and the arrogance that had nearly destroyed them all. His students were resistant at first. They did not want to hear that their ancestors had been wrong. They did not want to believe that their 400 years of victory had been built on cruelty and genocide. But Kethvora was patient. He had learned patience from the humans. He showed them the recordings from the Battle of Sol. He showed them the testimony from survivors of Dominion conquests. He showed them the faces of the species that had been exterminated, the cultures that had been erased, the worlds that had been reduced to ash. And slowly, grudgingly, the young Vethkai began to understand. One of his students asked him, years later, about the moment he had truly understood humanity's nature. Kethvora thought about the question for a long time before answering. It was not during the battle, he said. It was not when I saw their armada or watched my fleet die. It was after the surrender, when I was being held on one of their prison transports. He paused, remembering. There was a human medical team working on the ship. They were treating wounded Vethkai alongside their own casualties. I saw a human doctor, a young woman, spend 3 hours saving the life of a Vethkai officer who had killed her brother in the battle. She knew who he was. She had seen his name on the combat records, but she treated him anyway, because that was her duty, and because she believed that every life had value. I asked her why. Why help the enemy? Why save someone who had taken so much from her? She looked at me and said, because we're better than that. Because if we become like you, then you've already won. Even if we destroy your whole empire. We didn't fight to become conquerors. We fought to stay free. And freedom means choosing to be good, even when it hurts. Kethvora's eyes were distant, lost in memory. That was when I understood. The humans had not defeated us because they were stronger or faster or more numerous. They had defeated us because they were better. They had every reason to hate us, to want revenge, to treat us the way we had treated others. But they chose mercy instead, not because they were weak, but because they understood something we had never learned. What was that? The student asked. That true strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the wisdom to choose not to. The galaxy changed after the war. The Dominion was dismantled, its military disbanded, its conquered species freed. Some of those species chose revenge, launching attacks on Vethkai colonies and settlements. The humans intervened, protecting former enemies from former victims, trying to build a peace that would last. It was not easy. 400 years of conquest had created deep wounds. Species that had lost everything to the Dominion did not forgive easily. Some never forgave at all, but the humans were patient, and they were determined, and slowly, painfully, a new order began to emerge. The Galactic Council was formed 30 years after the war. It included representatives from every known spacefaring civilization, including the Vethkai. The humans had insisted on this. They argued that lasting peace required including everyone, even former enemies. Not everyone agreed, but the humans had earned enough respect to get their way. Admiral Helena Stone addressed the first session of the council. She was old now, her hair white and her movements slow, but her voice was still strong. We came to the stars expecting to find friends, she said. Instead, we found an empire that wanted to enslave us. We fought back, not because we wanted war, but because we had no other choice. We won, not because we were better warriors, but because we refused to give up. Now we have a choice about what kind of galaxy we want to build. We can create another dominion, another empire based on fear and force. Or we can try something different, something based on cooperation and mutual respect, something that gives every species a voice and a chance to thrive. It will not be easy. We will make mistakes. We will disagree. We will sometimes fail. But the alternative is to repeat the patterns of the past, to let fear and hatred drive us back into the darkness. And I believe, with all my heart, that we are better than that. Humanity has been fighting for survival since our ancestors first stood upright on the plains of Africa. We have faced ice ages and plagues, disasters and wars. We have fought each other with a ferocity that no other species can match. But we have also learned to cooperate, to build, to dream of something greater than ourselves. That is what we offer the galaxy now. Not conquest, not domination, but partnership, a chance to build something together that none of us could build alone. The choice is yours. We hope you will join us. The Council voted to accept humanity's proposal. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. 63 species chose to join the new alliance. Others followed in the years that came. The Galactic Council grew from a small assembly to a vast organization that spanned thousands of star systems. And through it all, humanity remained at the center, not as conquerors or rulers, but as protectors and mediators. When disputes arose, the humans helped resolve them. When threats emerged, the humans helped defeat them. When young species reached the stars for the first time, the humans were there to welcome them and guide them. They were not perfect. They made mistakes. They sometimes acted out of fear or anger or simple foolishness, but they always tried to be better. They always remembered where they had come from and what they had almost lost, and they never forgot the lesson they had learned from the war. Strength was not about weapons or numbers or technology. Strength was about the will to keep going when everything seemed hopeless, the determination to fight for what mattered, the courage to choose mercy when revenge would be so much easier. The humans had earned the right to rule the galaxy through force. They had chosen not to exercise that right, and in doing so, they had created something far more powerful than any empire. They had created hope. 100 years after the war, Kethvora died peacefully in his sleep. He was the last surviving Dominion admiral, the final witness to an age that had passed into history. His funeral was attended by representatives from dozens of species, including humans who had traveled across the galaxy to pay their respects. Admiral Stone had died years before, but her granddaughter spoke at the ceremony. She told the story of the war, of the surrender, of the unlikely friendship that had grown between the human admiral and her Vethkai counterpart. She spoke of the lessons they had learned together, the work they had done to build a better galaxy, the hope they had shared for the future. Kethvora spent the last decades of his life teaching young people about the mistakes of the past, she said. He believed that understanding those mistakes was the only way to avoid repeating them. He told his students that the Dominion had fallen not because the humans were stronger, but because the Vethkai had never learned to see other species as equals. They had assumed that their 400 years of victory made them superior. It made them blind. He often spoke of a saying that emerged among the younger species after the war, a warning that was passed from civilization to civilization, a reminder of what had happened when the Dominion faced the children of Earth. She paused and looked out at the assembled mourners. Humans and Vethkai, former enemies and current allies, all gathered to honor a being who had been transformed by defeat into something greater than he had ever been in victory. "Count your victories carefully," she said, "and pray you never face the children of Earth." Kethvora taught his students that this saying was wrong, not in its facts, but in its spirit. He said that the real lesson of the war was not that humanity was dangerous, but that every species deserves respect, that you should never assume you understand an enemy until you have walked in their world and seen through their eyes, that the universe is vast and strange and full of wonders that cannot be conquered or controlled. He believed that the galaxy was better because of the war, not because of the death and destruction, but because of what came after, the healing, the cooperation, the slow, painful work of building something new from the ashes of something old. He was a conqueror who learned to be a teacher, an admiral who learned to be a peacemaker, a Vethkai who learned to see humans not as enemies, but as partners in the great work of making the galaxy a better place. And in the end, he died believing that the work would continue, that the lessons of the war would not be forgotten, that the future would be brighter than the past. I hope he was right. I believe he was right. And I think, if he could see us now, all of us gathered here together, he would know that his hope was not misplaced. The ceremony ended. The mourners dispersed. Life went on. But in the halls of the Galactic Council, and in the classrooms where young beings learned about history, and in the stories that parents told their children before sleep, the memory of the war endured. The memory of a galaxy that had been ruled by fear and transformed by courage. The memory of an empire that had fallen and a species that had risen. The memory of the humans, the children of Earth, the Deathworlders who had refused to die, and the lesson that they had taught the universe, that true strength was not found in conquest or domination. That lasting peace required mercy as well as victory. That the greatest power in the cosmos was not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to build. The humans had come from a world of death and created a galaxy of life. They had faced an enemy that had never been defeated and broken them with kindness as much as with force. They had earned the right to rule through strength, and chosen instead to lead through example. And the stars themselves, which had once trembled at the coming of the Deathworlder Armada, now shone with the light of 1,000 civilizations working together toward a future that none of them could have imagined alone. This was the legacy of humanity. This was the gift they gave to the galaxy. This was the meaning of victory. In the end, it was not the countless battles won by the Vethkai that would be remembered. It was the single battle they had lost, and the wisdom that had grown from that defeat. It was the courage of the humans who had refused to surrender, and the mercy they had shown when they won. It was the fragile, precious hope that had emerged from the ashes of war, and the slow, steady work of building it into something lasting. The universe was vast and old and indifferent to the struggles of the tiny creatures who lived within it. But those creatures had learned to work together. They had learned to trust each other. They had learned that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and care and the stubborn refusal to give up. And somewhere, on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, the descendants of the first humans looked up at the night sky and saw not the cold darkness of space, but the warm glow of civilizations that had once been enemies and were now friends. They had done it. Against all odds, against all expectations, they had done it. They had survived. They had won. And they had built something worth surviving for. The story of humanity was not over. It would never be over. Not as long as there were stars to explore and mysteries to solve and beings to meet. But the first chapter, the chapter of war and fear and desperate struggle, had ended, and the next chapter, the chapter of peace and hope and endless possibility, had just begun.